what kinds of challenges are common among the women that you serve, whether if it's within a college context or in a church context, or if it's counseling specifically, or any other kind of ministry. I'd love to hear from each of you about that.
I think one of the things that I see, it's also among my husband's students and then the women that I work with at the church, is just the whole idea that we are unique image bearers of God. And I think as women, we tend to always compare ourselves with one another. And so that ends up either we are less than and we're discouraged because we're not as good as somebody else, or it can be, result in pride in our lives. And I see a real need in the women to know that God created them uniquely as image bearers, and he wants to use them in a unique way as an image bearer. And that can be such a beautiful thing to realize that there might be 3 teachers in the room, but they all teach differently out of who God made them to be. And I really see a need to free women up to follow the Lord in their calling and be who he created them to be. And I think then kind of going along with that, that we are uniquely gifted, but I've seen some of what you mentioned, Liz, in the comments. I think a need that we see is there are not enough opportunities for women in the local church to use the variety of gifts that they have. And so I think it's incumbent upon people in my role to create opportunities where women can use their gifts of teaching and leading and all the gifts, not only, working with the children or whatever it might be. And not to demean that, but I think too often we kind of categorize what roles are appropriate for women, and yet there are no gender specific gifts. And so even though we might have different roles or different ways of expressing those, I think I see a need in the church for women to be able to use their gifts.
Some of the challenges that are common with the women that I actually care for and even co-labor within the care ministry is, of course, conflict. There's always relational strife of some sort, right? Either in marriages or roommates or work, wherever. I think one of the things that I see as well is feeling unloved. So many women question, are they lovable? And they may not even say it very clearly, but when they question, how can God love me if he knew everything that I've done? And he does love them in spite of what they have done. And so, but I see that pattern a lot. I see women that are struggling with just feeling distant from God, that he's not present, he's not near, they're dry in their relationship with God. And then, of course, all of the struggles that we saw in Genesis 3, we call these common struggles. There's fear, shame, guilt, sorrow, fantasy, and anger. So those are just a number of things that I see, I'll confess as well, I struggle with these things too. There are days that I am struggling to believe these things. So it's not just for the women that I care for, but it is women that, it's myself as well.
That's really true and comforting. It's not just me. So I think for being a woman in an academic institution, I think that, and I have to say, first of all, that working at Boyce has been incredible. I feel so much support from my colleagues and administration and students. I think it's just such a great place to be. But I think collectively, I've seen this both at, not just necessarily at Boyce, but also at other institutions, even amongst students, is this general tendency to insecurity. And I think women in general are a bit more prone to imposter syndrome, if you're familiar with that, which is sort of like, everybody else belongs here except for me, or everybody else here in the room is smarter than me or has more opinions, and they're going to find me out that I don't actually belong here, And so I think that there's been a lot of research that's been done on that. And so I think, even talking to some of the female students at the seminary, of just knowing that there's just such value in pursuing theological education. And so you definitely have a voice and a reason there. And so just like Nora was saying, the ability to use your gifts and to be trained in that, I think that that's excellent. Something else I think that women have an issue with that perhaps men don't have, somewhat in academia and somewhat in the church, is just, when the majority of leadership roles are men, I think there's a balance of finding the right tension and relationship. How do you build collegiality and yet also be above reproach? And so sometimes I think that can lead to fewer opportunities for women, that I think Nora was talking about specifically in local churches, because it's kind of navigating some questionable waters. And so, I think these are just things that women have to think of that don't necessarily result in issues, but I think are constantly on the front of our minds, that can feed into that insecurity and then can also just create a lack of opportunities potentially.
So this next question is basically, what advice or encouragement would you like to share with the women that are in seminary or considering seminary in the future? I would love to hear from the panelists a little bit on that.
I think one of the things I would say, I think it's easy as a woman to feel unseen and unknown. And I think my advice would be, know that God sees you and he knows you and he is for you. I keep thinking of one of the things that God used in my life before I accepted my first ministry position back in Portland, Oregon, as a women's ministry director, was the end of Psalm 78, where it talks about how God took David from the sheepfolds, from tending the ewes and the lambs, to shepherd his people Israel. And I just felt very inadequate, and I had been home with my children, and I'd been on staff with Cru, but hadn't been in a women's ministry position in a church. And I wasn't really seeking it out, and yet the Lord saw me and knew that it would be very fulfilling for me, and that's what he wanted to do with my life. And I see many of you in seminary going in different directions and studying different things, but it's easy to think that it might be wasted, or that nobody sees you, or you don't have any contacts, and how are you going to find that position? And I think just be assured of the fact, trust God that he does see you, he knows you, he gifted you. And so whatever it is you're doing right now, and whatever he has you doing next, be faithful in that, as David was taking care of the sheep. And then he's the one that knows your address and knows your phone number and will, help you find what's next or what he wants you to do. So I think that would be the primary thing.
One of the things, as I think about just encouragement to share, I remember speaking with many women on the campus, and, not all of them, but a lot of these ladies were dry in their relationship with God. They're studying and reading and understanding theology, which is very, very, very important. But they were so busy that they did not spend time abiding with Jesus, receiving his word, praying his word, and therefore being able to live out his word. And so I would just say, that the most important thing I can encourage you with is to make sure that your spending time, abiding in Christ on a regular basis. I mean, we have got to be connected to the vine. Otherwise, we're just going to dry up. And so, and I'm not in seminary, and that can happen to me, even presently. I have to make it a priority, but I don't want to just make it a priority. God doesn't want me just to know about him. He wants me to know and experience his love, and to be reminded of his promises. Those are true for me, and I need to remember that. And if I'm not spending time in his word, I forget that. And many times I'm living a powerless life because I'm not abiding with Jesus. And so that's truly, I think, the most important encouragement I would want to give. But one other thing I'll say is, commit to serve in your local church, because this is where you're going to actually engage in ministry, and this is going to help you prepare for ministry. And so I can't say that enough. Abiding with Jesus and then getting involved in your church and working out what you're learning in seminary. So
Karen primarily stole everything I thought I was going to say. So that's okay. I'll just echo and say that that is excellent. And I guess I think the other things that I would follow up on as sort of secondary things, following your commitment to abiding with the Lord and then also serving in your church is, take advantage of the time that you're in seminary. I know that all of you have multiple things going on. You may be wives and mothers or already serving in a church and you're trying to balance a lot of plates. And so it can be tempting to just try to cut corners wherever you can. But I do think your time in seminary is limited. So just taking advantage of that to soak up the truths that you're gaining from your professors and from your classmates. I think that, or reading the books, not just because you have to fill out a reading percentage integrity quiz that says I read this much of the book, but also just taking the time that, later on in your life's probably not going to get less busy. And so, being forced to read this book or something like that, I think it can be helpful to just take advantage of that while you can. The other thing I would say is use this time to connect with other online students. I know that being online can sometimes feel a bit more disconnecting. I think I saw that in some of the comments Liz shared earlier. But I just want to encourage you that if someone on the discussion board, says something that you think strikes a resonant chord, feel free to connect with that person, send them a message. Don't be embarrassed about doing that. I teach a voice class online, but I have people who find their best friends in that class. I've had people found their spouse in my English class. So anyways, I think it's just really great. There's really great opportunities to connect and to make networks because, you might end up in different local churches, but you can, have these other resources available to you for a long period, even after you leave seminary.